The wind scraped low across the prairie, lifting ribbons of dust that curled like smoke toward a pale morning sky. A lone rider moved slow beneath it, her figure hunched slightly in the saddle, as if bracing not against weather, but memory. The mare beneath her was speckled with travel, legs caked in dry mud, breath steady and worn. Each hoof-step thudded softly into the crusted ground, the sound too small for such a vast and aching place. She wore a coat too thin for the chill and boots that had split along the soles, wrapped now in strips of canvas. Her dress was once blue, now faded to the color of old slate. Wind tugged at the stray curls escaping from her braid, but she didn't bother to tuck them back. Her eyes were alert, but far away, like someone who'd been searching so long she'd forgotten what she was hoping to find. A loose paper fluttered out from the worn saddlebag at her side. It tumbled across the dry brush before catching on a thorn bush. She didn't chase it. Just watched it dance and land. On its creased surface, a child's drawing, 3 girls, bald heads sketched in charcoal smudges. Above them, 2 words scrawled in haste, "Unwanted burden." She blinked slowly, dismounted, and walked toward the paper. The drawing wasn't hers. But she'd seen those girls, if not in flesh, then in some sorrow that clung like smoke to the inside of her ribs. She picked up the page with gentle fingers and folded it without a word. By noon, the sun was pale and high, barely touching the skin. Snow clung to the shaded hollows of the rocks, though the ground stayed dry and brown. The horse whinnied low and halted before a hollowed ravine where the land dipped sharply, like a wound never stitched. She squinted, and then saw it. A wagon. Or what was left of one. Its canvas top had long since blown away, and half the wooden frame had burned, charring black and twisted. One wheel lay several feet away, split in half. Scattered belongings littered the scene, clothing, bits of rope, shattered glass. Something about the silence here was different. It wasn't the usual emptiness of the plains. It was the hush of something left behind. She stepped slowly, the mare tied to a nearby trunk, reins limp. Her boots pressed into ash and cinder. There, just behind the ruins of the wagon bed, a bundle moved. She paused. Held her breath. Then moved forward, crouching low. It wasn't a bundle. It was a girl. Maybe 13. Head shaved clean. Face drawn tight with cold and hunger. Her arms were folded over her chest, and across the pale skin of her forearms were smudged, crude letters in charcoal, "Unwanted burden." The woman didn't flinch. She simply reached out and pressed 2 fingers to the girl's neck. A pulse, faint, but there. Another rustle. She turned. 2 more girls, curled near the broken axle, huddled together like pups in winter. One was older, 16 maybe, the other couldn't be more than 10. Their heads too were bare, and the same words marked their thin arms, written as if branding them for removal. The youngest whimpered softly, her eyes barely open. A cough, small and sharp, escaped her lips. The woman stood quickly and went to her mare, grabbing the blanket rolled beneath the saddle and a canteen of water. She knelt beside the 3 of them and spoke, low, quiet, a whisper meant to carry warmth more than words. "You're safe now." The older girl stirred, eyes opening just enough to show the whites. She flinched at the sound of the woman's voice, then blinked, confused. "We're not supposed to go with strangers," the girl rasped. "I'm not a stranger," the woman said gently, tucking the blanket around her. "Not to pain. Not to silence. Not to you." The middle girl clutched the younger one tighter. "They said we were no good. That we were left." The woman offered water to the youngest, who sipped with cracked lips. Then to the others. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't rush. "Do you remember who left you here?" she asked. The eldest shook her head faintly. "They wore crosses, but not the kind that saves." That was enough. The woman said no more. Words wouldn't help right now. She had known men who used scripture like chains, who whispered psalms over wounds they caused themselves. No gospel worth its salt would carve unwanted burden into a child's skin. She worked quickly, wrapping the girls in her coat and her blanket, lifting one after the other onto the mare. The horse, trained for weight and silence, stood steady. She walked beside it, holding the reins, boots breaking through dust and cinder with every step. As the wind shifted behind her, she thought she heard hoofbeats. Distant. Echoing down through the canyons like ghosts knocking on the sky. She stopped. Turned. Nothing. Only wind. Still, her hand slipped to the worn revolver holstered at her hip. Empty, save for 1 bullet. She hadn't fired it in years, but it sat there, heavy, like an old decision waiting to be made. She pressed on, guiding the horse northward, toward a place she hadn't seen in nearly 2 winters. A cabin tucked into the folds of pine and stone. No chimney smoke. No sign of others. Just memory carved into old walls. As the sun began to fall, shadows stretched across the prairie, long and broken. One of the girls, the youngest, leaned her cheek against the mare's neck and whispered, half asleep, "Are you taking us back?" The woman looked up at the paling sky, where stars were beginning to blink awake one by one. Her voice was quiet but steady. "No," she said. "We're not going back." They didn't ask where she was taking them. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe any direction away from that blackened wagon felt like salvation. She didn't know exactly what she was doing, only that she couldn't ride past. Couldn't forget their faces. Couldn't let the world write burden on them and walk away. As night settled in, the wind softened. The sky turned velvet. And the prairie, for all its scars, held them gently in its breath. Behind them, ash and broken boards marked a place where cruelty tried to bury innocence. Ahead, uncertain, unlit, but open, was the road where love might still remember how to begin. And though she hadn't spoken her name in weeks, as the middle girl dozed against the blanket, she murmured sleepily, "Ma'am, what should we call you?" The woman looked ahead, lips parting slowly. "Call me whatever feels safe," she whispered. "That'll be name enough." The stars blinked brighter. The silence grew softer. And the prairie, scarred but not empty, listened as four shadows moved forward, one step at a time, into the beginning of something that almost resembled hope. The cabin at Quiet Rock stood where the land rose in soft folds of pine and wind, nestled at the edge of a forgotten trail. It was small, built of weathered logs and patched with old tin, but it held the shape of safety, if not by design, then by necessity. Smoke hadn't curled from its stone chimney in over a year, but the woman knew the lock on the door still gave way with a firm shoulder and the right kind of will. She pushed the door open with her back, one girl in her arms, the others huddled on the mare behind her. Dust swirled in the doorway like ghosts disturbed. She laid the child down on a cot stripped bare but dry, and the room, cold and breathless, took them in. There was no firewood. No food. Just quiet. And quiet, for now, was enough. She moved fast. Stripped the oilcloth from the windows to let in the last gold of day. Shook the dust from an old wool blanket. The girls didn't speak. They didn't cry. They only watched, eyes wide and hollowed, as she lit a candle with shaking hands and searched the back cabinet for what might still be useful. A tin of beans. Dried apple slices. A broken comb. She soaked cloth in warm water from the kettle, scrubbed the soot and the cruel words from their skin, gently, firmly, like she was wiping the world away. When she came to the youngest, the girl whimpered and flinched. "I won't hurt you," the woman said softly. The girl whispered, "They said that, too." The woman didn't reply. Just held the child's hand steady and washed the filth off inch by inch, until the charcoal faded and only skin remained. By nightfall, the fire crackled low in the hearth, fed by branches snapped from the ridge behind the cabin. The girls lay wrapped in every blanket she could find, their breath slow, uneven. She fed them beans with the handle of a spoon and told them nothing about tomorrow. Only this: "You are not anyone's shame." They fell asleep to the sound of wind against the door, and the woman, barefoot and sore-backed, sat beside the fire and watched the flames work their slow magic on the cold. She should have been exhausted. She wasn't. Stillness like this had a way of waking every nerve in a person. The next morning came blue and sharp. Light filtered in through frost-laced glass. Snow had begun to fall again, soft as ash. The girls stirred slowly. The middle one sat up first, tugging the blanket to her chin. Her hair had started to grow, just a shadow of it, but her eyes were clearer than they had been. "Do we stay here now?" she asked. The woman nodded. "For a while." "What's this place called?" She paused. "It used to be known as Quiet Rock. Now, maybe it can mean something else." Later that day, she rode out alone to a cluster of cabins 4 miles north, where the ridge dipped into a basin. There she knocked on the crooked door of a wooden shack where a midwife used to live. Mags answered with a shotgun in her hand and suspicion in her eyes. "Thought you vanished." The woman gave a tired smile. "Not yet." Mags lowered the gun. "You look like you've seen death and invited it in for supper." "I found 3 girls. Abandoned. Shaved heads. Marked in charcoal with words that don't belong to children." Mags didn't ask for proof. Just grabbed her shawl, a tin of herbs, and followed without another word. At the cabin, she moved through the room like she'd always belonged in it, checking pulses, pressing palms, muttering over the girls as if reciting blessings in a tongue older than time. "They'll live," she said at last. "But you won't, not if you keep bleeding yourself dry for every soul that wanders in from the wind." "I'd rather bleed than forget what it means to feel." Mags snorted. "You always were a damn poet with cracked bones." The next day, a man came. She saw his horse before she saw him, a tall bay, built for work, not show. He rode with ease, coat flapping open in the wind, hat pulled low over a weathered face. His eyes were tired, but his hands were steady. He didn't ask questions. Just nodded toward the chopped woodpile, then added to it. She watched from the window, arms crossed, as he worked in silence. When he knocked, she opened the door but didn't move aside. "You looking for someone?" she asked. "No," he said. "Heard someone might need help. Help usually comes with a price." He looked past her, saw the girls sleeping in a heap near the fire. "My price is knowing they get to see spring." She stepped aside. He entered, dropped the sack of canned goods and sugar on the table, and didn't linger. He came back the next day. And the day after that. Sometimes he brought salt. Once, he brought a cracked mirror. Once, a children's book with water-warped pages. The girls didn't trust him at first. The oldest barely looked at him. But one day, the youngest offered him a stick of chalk and pointed to the cabin wall. "Draw," she said. He did. A horse. Then a tree. Then a sun with uneven rays. The girls laughed. It was a raw sound, but real. The woman smiled without showing her teeth. "You're no artist." He shrugged. "Didn't come here to be." At night, after the girls had gone quiet, she would sit on the porch while he split logs or carved something from driftwood. She didn't talk much. Neither did he. But the silence between them started to feel less like emptiness and more like a language they both understood. One night, she spoke. "They left those girls to die. Branded them with words they shouldn't even know." He didn't look up. "Some men think cruelty makes them righteous. They think silence makes them safe. You gonna let them come take the girls back?" She shook her head. "Over my bones." He nodded. "Then I'll be standing on your side." The girls began to change. Slowly. The oldest read the children's book to the youngest, stumbling over the words but trying. The middle one began to draw with charcoal on the inside walls, fields, hands reaching toward the sky, a cabin that looked too much like home to be coincidence. One morning, the youngest asked, "Do we get to choose our names?" The woman kneeled beside her. "You do now." And so they did. The youngest chose Rose, because she wanted to grow even if it hurt. The middle one picked Sparrow, because she liked the idea of flying low and fast, unnoticed. The eldest hesitated, then said, "Call me June. That was my mama's name." The woman wrote the names down on a strip of old linen and tied it to the inside of their coats. Outside, the snow began to melt in slow drips from the roof. The path to the cabin, once choked with frost and silence, had worn into something walked and remembered. But peace never stays long in places where women try to protect what men have thrown away. It was a Tuesday when the hooves came. 6 of them. Riders with wide hats and narrower hearts, claiming papers, kinship, and authority. The woman stood at the edge of the porch, rifle balanced low in her arms, gaze steady. The girl stayed inside. The man stood beside her, eyes darker than usual. "We were told," the leader of the riders said, "that 3 of ours wandered out this way." "They didn't wander," she replied. "They were discarded. They're ours by law." "You're mistaking law for ownership." He smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "You planning to fight?" "I already am." He glanced at the man beside her. "And you?" The rancher's voice was quiet. "I'd rather not spill blood in snow. But I'll do what needs doing." The man didn't press further. Just tipped his hat and turned. As they rode away, dust rose behind them, like something dying trying to pretend it was alive. She didn't relax. Not fully. Not yet. But that night, she lit the fire herself. Fed the girls until they laughed with full bellies. And when the oldest asked, "Will they come back?" she looked her square in the eyes and said, "Let them try." The air inside the cabin was warm and breathing now. Not just heat, but life. A flicker of something rebuilding where ruin had lived. Too long. And outside, beneath a sky slowly clearing of cloud and sorrow, the wind carried not just cold, but memory. Not of what had been, but of what they would refuse to let happen again. Rain fell soft against the cabin roof that morning, more like a hush than a storm. The sound moved through the room like breath, constant, gentle, and real. Inside, the fire had dwindled to warm coals, casting a faint red glow that painted the floorboards with memory. The girls sat around it, knees drawn to their chests, wrapped in wool and sleep. They didn't talk much anymore, not like they used to in their old lives, but in the silence between them, something softer had begun to grow. The woman moved about the room without noise, placing bowls of hot porridge on the table, her hand steady even as the storm outside tugged at the shutters. She had begun to learn their rhythms, how June liked her food near boiling, how Sparrow always stared into the fire before eating, and how Rose waited to see if it was safe before touching her spoon. It was in the small things that trust built itself, quiet and slow. June spoke first that morning. Her voice had a sanded-down edge, like something that had once been sharp but no longer tried to cut. "Were you ever a mother?" The woman stirred the fire, then paused. "Not in the way the world counts it." "But you wanted to be?" She nodded, once. "More than anything." There was a long pause. The girls kept eating. No one filled the silence with comfort. That was the only comfort now, that truth could exist without needing to be dressed. Later, as the storm tapered to mist, the girls stood near the window, fingers tracing condensation on the glass. Sparrow drew little symbols in the fog, then quickly wiped them away. The woman noticed. "What were you writing?" "Names," Sparrow whispered. "Yours?" Sparrow looked over her shoulder. "No. The ones they gave us. I keep trying to forget them." "You don't have to remember who they called you," the woman said. "You can choose what stays." Sparrow didn't answer. But she stopped wiping the fog away. That afternoon, the man returned. Mud clung to his boots, and the front of his coat was soaked through, but he didn't seem to notice. He entered with a nod, as he always did, leaving his hat by the door. His presence was quiet but grounding, like the weight of stone beneath a riverbed. Rose ran to him without words and held out a piece of folded paper. On it was a crude drawing, a house, a fire, and 4 stick figures labeled with looping scrawl, me, Sparrow, June, you. He smiled, crouched down, and pointed at the unnamed 4th figure. "That you?" he asked, looking up at the woman. She shook her head. "She doesn't draw me." Rose corrected him. "That's her. But I didn't know what name to write." The room went still. The woman's hands tightened around the cup she was holding. "You can just write her for now." June stepped forward. "No. That's not right." They all looked at her. "She saved us," June said, voice firm. "She fed us. Bathed us. Sat by us when no one else would. She's not just her." Sparrow lifted her chin. "She's the reason we're still breathing." Even Rose, shy as a shadow, whispered, "We should call her something real." The woman set down her cup slowly. She looked at the 3 of them, each shaped by pain, each now bold enough to speak aloud their claim to a truth the world had once stolen. "I used to have a name," she said. Sparrow tilted her head. "What was it?" The woman didn't answer right away. She walked to the window and stared out across the soaked ground, where a creek had begun to swell. After a long pause, she whispered, "I was called Willa." Rose tested the name on her tongue. "Willa. It feels like a secret," Sparrow added. June folded her arms. "Feels like something solid." The man, still kneeling, looked up. "Willa suits you." She looked at him, something unspoken passing between them. She didn't flinch. Didn't look away. For the first time in years, the sound of her name didn't echo like loss. It landed like a thread stitched back into her skin. That night, Rose asked for a story. Not a fairy tale. Something real. Willa thought for a moment, then told them about the time she got lost in a snowstorm and followed the howl of a coyote to shelter. How she slept in the hollow of a tree and dreamed of fireflies. The girls leaned in, eyes wide, listening like they'd never heard a story where someone lived instead of died. When the fire burned low again, Sparrow, still drawing in charcoal, handed Willa a folded page. On it, 4 figures again. This time, each with a name, Rose. Sparrow. June. Willa. "I remembered," Sparrow said. "I just needed time." Days passed. The man, who finally gave his name, Thomas, returned often, sometimes with food, sometimes with supplies, always with a presence that asked nothing. The girls grew bolder with him. Rose climbed into his lap once without thinking. June asked him to read a passage from the weathered book they'd found. He did, slow and careful, his voice made for quiet evenings. Willa didn't question his presence anymore. Didn't ask why he came. Part of her had stopped asking what could be trusted. The answer lived in the firelight, in the way the girls began to brush each other's hair, in how they hummed as they cleaned the cabin. But peace is a fragile thing in the West. One morning, Sparrow found a scrap of cloth nailed to the pine tree near the creek. 3 names. They're real ones. The ones they'd buried. Below it, written in harsh ink, "Property of St. Augustine's Home for Wayward Girls. Return immediately." Willa burned the cloth in the stove before the girls could see it. When Thomas arrived that evening, she didn't greet him. Just handed him the ashes in a tin and said, "They know we're here." He didn't ask who they were. He just said, "Then we'll be ready." They spent the next day preparing. Boards nailed to the window frames. A rifle cleaned for the first time in months. Thomas fashioned wooden locks for the doors, reinforced them with iron nails. The girls sensed the shift. Their play turned quiet. Rose stayed close to Willa's side. June helped sharpen the small knife she'd kept hidden under the floorboards. Sparrow stopped drawing. That night, Willa sat by the fire with the girls asleep around her. Thomas was whittling on the porch, his knife moving slow through cedar. "I don't know what they'll bring," she said. He didn't look at her. "It doesn't matter. They'll have papers. Maybe men who think children belong to them. I've got fire. And bullets. And truth." She exhaled. "I don't want to run again." "You won't." Inside, Rose stirred, murmured something in her sleep. Willa rose, tucked the blanket tighter around her. She looked older, all of them did. Like surviving had aged them faster than years could. When she turned, Thomas was at the doorway. You know, he said softly, they gave them names to make them forget who they were. But you gave them names to remember who they could be. Willa didn't respond. Instead, she reached for her old journal, the one with blank pages she hadn't dared fill. She opened it to the first page. Wrote, Rose, Sparrow, June, Willa. And below that, for words. Names the wind forgot. She smiled faintly. Then, outside, far off through the trees, a crow called once, sharp and sudden. Willa stood. They were coming. Soon. But now, they had names no one could take. And that was how they would fight. The frost had settled like glass over the ground, glinting sharp beneath the morning sun. Willa stood at the woodpile, breath pluming in the cold, hand steady as she split another log. Behind her, the cabin exhaled quiet warmth, embers still red from breakfast, the girls inside humming softly as they cleaned the few dishes they owned. Peace hung in the air, taut and fragile, the kind that made a soul pause and hold it like something borrowed. She heard the hooves before she saw the dust. A rhythm too perfect to be wild, tight, deliberate, the sound of men who weren't passing through. Her body reacted first. The axe dropped. Her hand found the rifle leaning against the doorway. Her breath slowed. Thomas emerged from the trees a moment later, his eyes already narrowed. You hear them too, she said. He nodded once. 4, maybe 5 riders. Coming from the south road. Willa stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Girls, she said quietly, come here. They knew better than to ask questions. June put down the broom. Sparrow moved from the hearth. Rose clutched her doll, hand-stitched from rags, and followed the others. Willa knelt in front of them. I want you to go into the root cellar. Take blankets, stay quiet. Don't come out unless you hear my voice. Sparrow's voice quivered. Are they here to take us? Willa placed her palm over the girl's cheek. They'll try. Will you stop them? She nodded. I already am. Thomas stood by the door, checking the chamber of his revolver. Not hurried. Just sure. You don't have to stay, Willa said without looking at him. You don't have to fight alone, he answered. The girls disappeared beneath the trapdoor, quiet as snowfall. By the time the riders arrived, the wind had picked up, whistling low through the trees. 5 of them. Dust-covered hats, boots polished with spite, faces lean and lined. At their head rode a man with a coat too clean for his company and eyes like flint, cold, sharp, gray. Willa stood on the porch, Thomas just behind her. The leader of the riders raised a gloved hand. We're looking for property gone missing. This is a home, Willa replied. Not a stable. The man dismounted with practiced ease, removing a folded paper from his coat. These 3 girls, he said, voice slow and performative, were placed under the care of the St. Augustine's Home for Wayward Girls. Escaped. Stole supplies. Left without blessing. Thomas scoffed under his breath. The man continued. They're under state guardianship, which makes their retrieval a legal duty. Willa stepped forward, chin high. You can dress it in legal words all you want. What you did wasn't care. You left them in the snow with shaved heads and shame scrawled across their skin. They were broken things. Sometimes, God don't bless every child with purpose. Thomas stepped down beside her. You think it's God who lets you abandon girls like livestock? The other riders shifted in their saddles, hands near their holsters. Willa didn't blink. You've got no jurisdiction here. No badge. No law. Just cruelty disguised as order. The man's smile didn't touch his eyes. You stand in defiance? I'm standing in protection. He handed her the paper. She didn't take it. You can bring all the signatures you want, she said, but those girls aren't going anywhere with you. The man folded the paper back into his coat with a sigh. You make it hard. Thomas raised his voice just enough. There's 10 good men in the valley who know these girls are here. You shoot your way through this door, you'll answer for it. Maybe, the rider replied. Or maybe the West just swallows another batch of graves. Willa didn't move. Her hands hung at her sides, calm and ready. Then, from the cabin window, a voice rang out. June's. You think we're scared of you? The men turned. June stood at the window, face steady, hair braided down her back. We've had worse than you, she said. Rose appeared beside her, clutching the rag doll, eyes burning. And we didn't die. Sparrow stepped into view last, holding a piece of charcoal in her hand. You didn't mark us. You just reminded us who we weren't. The lead rider's smile slipped. Willa's voice cut through the stillness. You hear them? That's not fear. That's defiance. The man mounted his horse again, slowly. You'll regret this kindness, he said. It always rots. No, Willa replied. It roots. He turned his horse, and the others followed, dust trailing behind them like a bad promise. Willa didn't lower her rifle until they were far enough to become shadows. Thomas stood beside her, breath easing. "You think they'll come back?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "But not tonight." They waited a long while before opening the cellar door. The girls climbed out, blinking into the light. June looked at Willa. "You said they wouldn't take us. And they didn't." Sparrow stepped forward and offered Willa the charcoal still gripped in her hand. "I want to write new words on the wall," she said. "What words?" "Chosen. Safe. Home." That night, the fire burned bright. Willa sat with Thomas on the porch, her feet bare, toes pressing into the worn wood like roots sinking into something finally their own. He handed her a cup of coffee. She sipped it, eyes on the stars. "You ever think of leaving?" he asked. She shook her head. "I already did once. And I found nothing. Now I found everything I lost." Inside, the girls giggled over something Sparrow had drawn, a crude picture of 5 figures standing in front of a house, all smiling. Willa saw it through the window. Thomas leaned back. "They're not afraid of him anymore." "No," Willa said. "Now he's afraid of them." And for the first time in years, she felt the sky shift from something that loomed to something that listened. The first sign wasn't the smoke. It was the silence. No wind. No birds. Not even the creek, which usually gurgled somewhere down behind the pines, murmured that morning. Just stillness. The kind that arrived before storms, or men. Willa stood at the cabin door, one hand resting on the frame, her breath caught halfway to her lungs. The girls were still asleep on their cots, huddled under quilts. Thomas was outside, splitting wood as usual, but even he had paused, axe halfway to the stump, head turned slightly like a man listening to something that hadn't yet spoken. The second sign came with dust. A thick cloud rose over the ridge, no longer the soft gray of windswept earth, but the heavy churn of too many hooves on dry ground. Willa stepped out onto the porch, her voice calm but sharp. "Thomas." He nodded. "I see it. They're not here to talk this time." "No, they're not." She turned back into the cabin and gently knelt beside June. "Up, sweetheart. Now." June opened her eyes instantly, already alert, already knowing. Sparrow and Rose stirred as Willa moved from cot to cot, her voice a constant thread of calm urgency. "Get dressed. Pack what you can carry. We don't run, but we may need to move." Sparrow's hands trembled as she pulled on her boots. "How many?" Willa checked the window. "More than before." Thomas came to the door, rifle slung across his back, holster at his hip. He met Willa's eyes. "They've brought fire." And they had. By the time the girls stood on the porch, eyes wide and unblinking, the riders had crested the ridge. 10 of them. Torches lit even in morning light, flickering against the sky like threats carved in flame. The man in the clean coat rode at the front again, only this time, he didn't smile. He reined in 30 yards from the cabin, his horse snorting, torch held high. "This is your final warning," he shouted. "Hand over the girls, or we take them. Burn or bleed, your choice." Willa stepped forward, rifle in hand but lowered. "They're not yours," she said. "They were given to the home. That makes them state wards. Runaways. Thieves." "They're children," she replied. "And I don't care who they stole from. The world already stole from them first." He sneered. "And what are you? Their new mother?" Willa didn't flinch. "Yes." The riders spread out, circling the front of the property, their eyes narrowing, hands near weapons. One reached down and lit a bundle of dried brush. Another tossed it near the woodpile. The fire caught quickly. June stood beside Willa, shaking but tall. She didn't speak. Rose stepped beside her, hands balled into fists. Sparrow, quietest of all, walked forward and held up a word carved on a scrap of wood, "Belong." The man in the clean coat laughed. "You think words save you?" Willa raised her rifle. "No," she said. "But bullets buy us time." The first shot cracked through the air like bone splitting. Thomas fired from the tree line, clean, fast, precise. One rider fell backward off his horse with a shout, leg twisted beneath him. The others scattered momentarily, startled by the unexpected ambush. The torchbearer dropped his flame into the dirt. Another man's horse reared and kicked, panicked by the gunfire. Willa turned to the girls. "Inside. Stay down. If anything happens, take the back path, cross the creek, head to Mag's old shed. Wait for me there." June hesitated. "We're not leaving you." Willa gripped her shoulders. "You're not. You're surviving me." Thomas emerged from the trees, revolver in hand, reloading quickly. His jaw was clenched. He moved like a man who'd been waiting his whole life for one good reason to fight. "Two down," he said. "But they'll regroup fast." The fire near the woodpile had spread. Sparks reached the edge of the cabin's porch. Smoke curled upward into the pines, dragging the scent of destruction through the air. Willa fired once, missed, but forced a rider back. The man in the clean coat shouted orders, then rode forward himself, pistol drawn. "I told you," he yelled. "You can't save what the world discards." Willa met him in the clearing. Her rifle was out of bullets, but she didn't raise it. She let it fall and pulled the knife from her belt instead. "You don't get to decide who's worth keeping," she said. He swung. She ducked low, moved in quick, and slashed, not fatal, but enough. He roared and dropped his gun. Blood welled from his thigh. "You think you're righteous," he spat. "You think this matters?" "No," Willa said. "I know it does." Thomas tackled a rider who dismounted, fist meeting jaw with a crack. The girls watched from the cabin window, wide-eyed but unmoving, just as they'd promised. The fire reached the porch, licking at the railings. Inside the cabin, Sparrow picked up the small water bucket and began to throw it over the flames. June grabbed blankets, pressed them against the wood. Rose clutched the rag doll and began to pray. The remaining riders, disoriented by the resistance, began to retreat. Two helped their wounded leader back onto his horse. Another tried to set the barn alight, but Thomas stopped him with a warning shot to the air. The man in the clean coat looked back one last time. "You haven't won anything," he growled. "They'll come again. Bigger." Willa wiped blood from her cheek. "Let them bring the world. We'll bury it." And then he was gone, trailing blood and pride behind him like broken flags. The fire smoldered out in patches, beaten by hands that refused to surrender. The cabin still stood, scorched but breathing. Willa sat on the front steps as dusk approached, shirt torn, fingers raw. The girl sat beside her, silent for a long time. Then Rose spoke. "You didn't let them take us." "No," Willa said. "I never would." Sparrow leaned against her side. "I wasn't sure if I was still real before you." "You always were." June picked at the edge of her blanket. "What if they come back with lawmen? With judges?" Willa looked up at the stars beginning to pierce the twilight. "Then we'll teach them what justice really means." Thomas brought out a pot of water and started washing blood from his knuckles. "They'll think twice next time," he said. "There shouldn't be a next time," Willa replied. There was no reply to that. Just fireflies blinking in the shadows, and the sound of the land exhaling. That night, the girls painted new names onto the wall with charcoal. Not their given names. Not the ones written in old ledgers. Names they chose. Rose. Sparrow. June. And beneath them, in a steadier hand, someone wrote Willa. No longer a secret. No longer forgotten. The flames had tried to erase them. But they stayed. Not as burdens. Not as girls left behind. But as names the world had tried to bury, and failed.